A billionaire's mansion. 43 nannies. All of them quit. Not because the pay was bad. Not because the hours were long. But because of one tiny boy, 2 years old, blind since birth, and so broken by grief that no one on this earth could reach him.
He didn't speak. He didn't eat unless forced.
He didn't sleep without screaming himself into exhaustion. And every single night, in a nursery that cost more than most people's homes, little Elliot Hargrove lay in the dark. Actually in the dark, the same dark he had always known, and cried for a mother who would never come back. His father, Roman Hargrove, was worth $11 billion. He could buy anything. He had bought the best specialists, the most decorated child therapists, the highest-paid nannies in the country. He had bought a nursery full of the softest toys, the most expensive mobiles, the gentlest sound machines. But he could not buy the one thing his son needed. And then, on a Tuesday morning that looked like every other Tuesday morning, a 3-year-old girl in a worn yellow dress walked into that nursery. She had no credentials, no training, no idea what grief even was. She just had a small white feather and the purest heart you have ever seen. And in 60 seconds, she did what 43 nannies could not do in 14 months. She made Elliot Hargrove laugh. Before we go any further into this story, and I promise you, you're going to want every single word of it, I want to stop for just a moment and ask you something. Where in the world are you watching this right now? Are you in the United States, maybe curled up on your couch with your coffee? Are you in the United Kingdom, watching this on a rainy afternoon? Maybe you're in Canada or Australia, sitting somewhere quiet while the kids are finally asleep. Perhaps you're in India, watching this after a long day, or maybe in Germany, discovering this story for the very first time. Wherever you are, drop your country in the comments right now. Just your country. That's it. Because this community spans the entire world, and every single one of you matters. And this story belongs to all of you. Because it isn't really about money, or mansions, or billionaires. It's about the most powerful thing in the universe, and it costs absolutely nothing.
Now,
let's go back to the beginning. Roman Hargrove had not always been a cold man. There were people who remembered him differently. His college roommate, who recalled a young Roman laughing so hard at a terrible movie that he fell off the couch. His first assistant, a woman named Patricia, who kept a photograph on her desk for years of Roman at the company's first Christmas party, dancing badly and not caring at all. His mother, Eleanor, who remembered a boy who used to bring home every stray cat in the neighborhood and hide them under his bed, convinced she wouldn't notice that Roman had existed.
Once.
But grief is a sculptor, and it doesn't always create beautiful things. When Vivian died, quietly, terribly, in a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and false hope, something in Roman didn't just break.
It left.
Like a light being switched off in a room, and the switch being removed entirely so you couldn't even try to turn it back on. Vivian Hargrove, née Castellano, had been 32 years old. She had been the kind of woman who remembered every person's birthday, who kept a jar of lemon candies on her desk because she said they made people smile when they walked in, who had learned 3 words of every language spoken by anyone on her staff because she believed people deserved to be greeted in the language of their hearts. She had also been 7 months pregnant with complications that the doctors had called manageable, right up until the moment they weren't. Elliot had survived. Premature, fragile, and blind, a condition the doctors attributed to the complications of his early arrival, but alive. A fighter, the nurses said, with a kind of forced cheerfulness that Roman had learned to hate. As if fighting were a comfort when you were fighting alone in an incubator while your father sat in a parking garage and stared at a concrete wall for 4 hours because he couldn't make his legs walk back inside. He had eventually gone back in. He had held his son. He had looked at the tiny, perfect face, Vivian's nose, Roman's chin, nobody's eyes because the eyes were closed, always closed or open and unseeing, and he had felt something so enormous and so terrible that he had no name for it. Love and devastation, braided together so tightly you couldn't pull one free without destroying the other. He had brought Elliot home to Hargrove House, a 16,000 square foot estate outside of Hartford, Connecticut, with iron gates and a half-mile driveway and grounds that a team of 7 maintained year-round. The nursery had been prepared during Vivian's pregnancy, painted the softest sage green she had chosen herself, with a mural of foxes and rabbits along one wall that a local artist had spent 3 weeks completing. Roman had stood in the doorway of that nursery on the day he brought Elliot home and looked at the fox mural for a long time. Then he had quietly asked his estate manager, a meticulous man named Gerald, to repaint the wall. Gerald had not asked why. The first nanny arrived within the week. Her name was Mrs. Fontaine, a 60-year-old British woman with impeccable references and the kind of calm authority that usually settled anxious children within hours. She lasted 11 days. "The child is inconsolable," she told Gerald when she submitted her resignation, and there was genuine distress in her voice, not frustration, not complaint, but something closer to grief. "I have worked with children for 35 years. I have never encountered anything like this. Whatever that baby is feeling, it is beyond my ability to reach." The second nanny lasted 8 days. The third lasted 3 weeks, which everyone thought was a breakthrough, until Elliot developed a habit of going completely silent the moment she entered the room, not the peaceful silence of a sleeping child, but something eerie and absolute, a silence that somehow felt louder than crying. The child therapist, Dr. Anand, came twice a week. He was gentle and patient and brilliant. He told Roman that Elliot was experiencing something that could only be described as preverbal grief, an infant's body and nervous system responding to an absence so foundational that it had become woven into the child's baseline experience of the world. "He doesn't know what he's missing," Dr. Anand explained carefully, "but his body does. Infants bond in the womb. He knew her heartbeat before he knew anything else. And then it was gone." Roman had sat with that for a long moment. "How do we fix it?" he had asked. And Dr. Anand, who was a good man and an honest one, had said, "We give him time, and we give him connection. We keep trying." So Roman kept trying. He hired nanny after nanny. He sat in the nursery himself, sometimes in the early mornings, sat in the rocking chair that Vivian had picked out, a beautiful antique thing with curved maple arms, and held his son and said nothing because he didn't know what to say, and maybe that was its own kind of problem. 2 broken people in a sage green room, holding on to each other in the dark. 43 nannies. 14 months. And then Gerald came to Roman one gray October morning with a look on his face that Roman couldn't quite read, something between apology and hope, which was an uncomfortable combination on a man as composed as Gerald. "Sir," Gerald said, "there's been a development." The development had a name. Her name was Maria Santos, and she had come to work at Hargrove House not as a nanny, but as a member of the domestic cleaning staff, specifically the morning team that handled the east wing of the house, which included the formal dining room, the library, and the long portrait gallery where Roman's ancestors stared down from oil paintings with the particular expression of people who had always expected the world to behave itself. Maria was 26 years old, quiet and efficient, and entirely unremarkable in the way that people sometimes are when they are simply getting through the day. She had grown up in Bridgeport, the daughter of a seamstress and a man who drove a delivery truck until his back gave out. She had taken the job at Hargrove House because it paid better than the diner where she'd worked before, and because the commute was manageable, and because her daughter needed new shoes. Her daughter's name was Rosa. Rosa Santos was 3 years and 4 months old. She had her mother's dark eyes, her late grandmother's gap-toothed smile, and an absolute conviction, held with the total confidence of a person who has never had cause to doubt it, that the world was a fundamentally wonderful place full of interesting things that were only waiting to be noticed. She also had, in her coat pocket on most days, whatever small treasure she had found most recently. A smooth gray pebble, a button that had come off her favorite sweater and been preserved, a piece of blue sea glass, a small white feather that she had found in the parking lot of a grocery store and immediately recognized as something magical. Rosa came to Hargrove House because her mother had no choice. The woman who usually watched Rosa had fallen ill on that particular Tuesday in October, and Maria had exhausted her backup options. Her neighbor, her cousin, the older woman on the 3rd floor who sometimes helped, before she had done the things she hated doing, which was bringing Rosa to work with her. She had explained the situation to Gerald the evening before, mortified and apologetic, and Gerald had said, with perfect neutrality, that it would be fine for one day, and that the child was to stay close to her mother and not touch anything. Rosa had agreed to these terms with great seriousness. She had then, approximately 40 minutes into the morning, wandered away. Not out of mischief. Rosa was not, at her core, a mischievous child. She wandered because she was 3, and because the hallway that led from the east wing toward the central staircase had the most extraordinary thing on its ceiling, a chandelier with hundreds of small crystal drops, and the morning light coming through the tall windows was hitting those crystals at exactly the right angle to send tiny rainbows scattered across the walls and floor. Rosa had stopped walking and turned in a slow circle, watching the rainbows move, her mouth open in pure delight. And then, from somewhere above, from somewhere up the grand staircase and down the long corridor and through the closed door of the sage green nursery, she had heard a sound.
Crying.
Not the brief, healthy crying of a child who had dropped something or wanted a snack. This was different. Rosa was 3, but she was a child who paid attention, and something in that sound reached her in a way she couldn't have articulated but absolutely felt. She stood at the bottom of the staircase. She looked up. She looked back toward the east wing, where her mother was. Then she put her hand on the banister, a beautiful curved thing of polished mahogany, and began to climb. The nursery door was not fully closed. It had been left an inch ajar by the current nanny, a young woman named Stephanie who was technically on duty but had stepped into the adjoining room to make a phone call, having convinced herself that 2 minutes wouldn't matter. Rosa pushed the door open with 2 small hands. She stood in the doorway of the sage green nursery and looked. The room was beautiful and quiet except for the crying. There was morning light coming through curtains the color of cream. There were shelves of toys arranged with the precision of objects that had never really been played with. There was a large white crib in the center of the room, and in it, a very small boy with dark curls and pale skin and tightly closed eyes that were wet with tears. Rosa looked at him for a moment. Then she walked in. She did not call for anyone. She did not run back downstairs to find her mother. She did not stand in the doorway and wait for an adult to tell her what to do. She was 3 years old and she had heard a baby crying and she had walked into the room because that was simply what you did when someone was sad. You went to them. She crossed the nursery floor in her small sneakers, the ones with the Velcro straps because she hadn't learned laces yet, and she reached the crib and stood on her tiptoes and looked over the railing at Elliot Hargrove. He was still crying. His small fists were clenched against the mattress. His face was scrunched with a grief so total and so practiced that it had become, in its way, its own kind of expression, not a temporary state but a settled one, a face that had learned that crying was simply what the world felt like. Rosa watched him for a moment.
"Hi," she said.
Elliot didn't stop crying. He couldn't see her, couldn't know she was there. Nothing in his limited experience of a world had ever suggested that the appearance of another person meant comfort was coming. Rosa was not discouraged. She reached into her coat pocket. She was still wearing her coat, the small red one with the missing toggle button, and she found what she was looking for. The white feather. Soft and slightly curved, about 4 inches long. The kind of feather that looked like it might have come from a dove, though Rosa had found it in a grocery store parking lot, and the ornithological origins were somewhat unclear. She reached through the crib railing, just her small arm and hand, carefully, and she did something very gentle. She touched the feather to Elliot's cheek. Just lightly.
Just barely.
The softest possible contact. Elliot's crying hitched. The sound changed, not stopped, but interrupted, the way a song gets interrupted by a sudden sound and has to find its way back to the melody. Rosa moved the feather again.
Slowly.
Across his cheekbone, soft as a whisper, soft as a breath. Elliot's hands unclenched. His small fingers opened on the mattress, like a flower considering whether it wanted to bloom. Rosa leaned a little closer, watching his face with the complete and serious attention of a scientist observing something important. She moved the feather again, a slow, soft sweep across his cheek. And Elliot Hargrove, who had not laughed in 14 months, who had never in his short life been given a reason to, made a sound. It started small. A tiny interruption in the crying, a break in the pattern, something that wasn't quite a sound yet, but was the shape of one. Rosa felt it. She kept going, gentle, steady, the feather moving like it was drawing something very careful on his cheek. And then it happened. The giggle. Small and sudden and completely startled, like Elliot himself was surprised by it, like his own body had done something unexpected. A single bright note in the sage-green room. Rosa's face broke into her grandmother's gap-toothed smile. Again, she asked him, very seriously. She touched the feather to his cheek again. He giggled again. Louder. Rosa giggled back. And just like that, without ceremony, without credentials, without any of the expensive interventions that had been tried and failed and tried again, 2 children were laughing together in a room that had almost forgotten what laughter sounded like. Stephanie, the nanny, came back into the nursery 43 seconds later. She stood in the doorway and stared. She had never, in her 3 weeks in this house, heard that sound. She pulled out her phone with shaking hands and called Gerald. Gerald, whose composure was legendary and had survived 30 years of working for extremely demanding wealthy people, listened to what Stephanie told him and said, "I'll inform Mr. Hargrove," in a voice that was, just slightly, not entirely steady. Roman Hargrove was in his home office when Gerald knocked. 2 precise knocks, the signal that meant this requires your attention, now rather than this can wait until you're finished. He was on a call with Tokyo. He held up one finger to indicate he needed a moment, and Gerald waited in the doorway with an expression Roman had never seen on him before. Roman ended the call early. He hadn't ended a call early in 14 months. "What is it?" he said. "Sir," Gerald said, "you should come upstairs." "Is Elliot?" Roman was already standing. "He's fine," Gerald said quickly. "He's more than fine." He paused. "That is, in fact, the situation." Roman had not run in this house. He didn't run anywhere anymore. There was nowhere to run to. But he walked fast, his long strides eating up the distance between the east staircase and the nursery corridor, and when he reached the partially open door and heard the sound coming from inside, he stopped. He stood very still in the hallway. He listened. Laughter. His son's laughter. Small and bright and real, punctuated by another child's giggle, back and forth like a conversation, like a song. Roman's hand went to the doorframe. Not to push the door open.
just to hold on to something.
He stood there for a long moment. He was 35 years old, and he was the 14th wealthiest person in the country, and there were people who feared him, and people who admired him, and people who wanted things from him in approximately equal measure, and none of that was available to him right now, in this hallway, listening to his blind son laugh for the first time. He pushed the door open quietly. Rosa Santos was sitting cross-legged on the nursery floor next to the crib. At some point, she had retrieved a small stuffed bear from one of the shelves, one of the many toys that had never been played with, and she was making it walk along the crib railing, narrating its journey in a 3-year-old's unself-conscious murmur while Elliot stood at the railing, both small hands gripping the bars, his face tilted up and toward her voice with an expression that Roman had never seen on him before. Attention. Pure, engaged, wanting attention. The feather was tucked behind Rosa's ear. Roman looked at his son's face for a long time. He looked at this small girl in a red coat with a missing toggle button, making a stuffed bear walk along a crib railing, perfectly unaware that she had just done something that 11 specialists and 43 nannies and one devastated billionaire had failed to do. "Elliot," Roman said softly. His son turned his head toward the voice. That was normal. Elliot had always responded to sound. What was not normal was what happened next. Elliot smiled. Not the reflexive, fleeting expression that sometimes crossed his face in sleep. A real smile, directed at the sound of his father's voice. Roman sat down on the nursery floor. He sat down right there, in his $1,200 trousers, on the soft rug, and he put his face in his hands. Rosa looked at him with great interest. "He's sad," she told Elliot, with the confident diagnostic ability of a 3-year-old. "Your daddy is sad." She got up, walked over to Roman, and patted his knee 3 times with her small hand. Then she went back to the crib and made the bear walk again. Maria Santos found out what had happened from Stephanie, who met her in the hallway outside the nursery with wide eyes and a whispered account that Maria initially didn't fully believe. She stood outside the nursery door and looked through the gap and saw her daughter sitting on the floor next to Roman Hargrove, who was also on the floor, watching Elliot with an expression that Maria could only describe later when she tried to explain it to her own mother as someone coming back to life. She reached for the door handle. Gerald appeared at her elbow. "If you'll permit me," he said quietly. "Perhaps just a moment longer." Maria looked at him. "He hasn't smiled in 14 months, Gerald said. There was nothing professional in his voice. Just truth, and the particular exhaustion of someone who has been bearing witness to grief for a very long time. Not once. Not at anything." Maria looked back through the gap in the door. She left her hand off the door handle. That evening, when Roman finally emerged from the nursery, Elliot had fallen asleep, genuinely peacefully asleep, for the first time in recent memory. He found Maria Santos waiting in the hallway to apologize. She had prepared a full apology, carefully worded, about bringing Rosa to work without proper authorization and allowing her to wander and... Roman looked at her for a moment. "How old is she?" he said. 3, Maria said. 3 and 4 months. "I'm so sorry. She slipped away from me while I was..." "What's her name?" "Rosa." Roman nodded. He looked down the hallway toward nothing in particular. "What did she do?" he said. "I saw, with the feather." "What did she do?" Maria shook her head slowly. "I don't know. She stopped. She's always been like that. If something's sad, she goes to it. She doesn't think about it. She just goes." Roman was quiet for a moment. "Does she like it here?" he said. "The house, I mean, when she came in this morning." Maria blinked. She loved the chandelier, the rainbows. She talked about them the whole drive home last time I had to bring her. She said the house has rainbows living in it. Something crossed Roman's face. Not quite a smile. The possibility of one. "I'd like to make a proposal," he said. "Professionally." with appropriate compensation and full benefits. I'd like your daughter to come here. Not as a nanny, she's 3. That would be absurd. He stopped. Started again. My son needs a friend. I think that's what it is. I think he just needs someone who isn't afraid of his sadness. Maria looked at him for a long time. She's not afraid of anything, she said. And there was love and exhaustion and pride all in it at once, the particular cocktail of emotion that belongs to parents. I know, Roman said. I watched her. The arrangement they reached was practical and generous. Maria would join the household staff in a senior capacity, with hours structured so that Rosa could be present each morning in a proper, supervised, intentional way. Dr. Anand would oversee the interactions. Stephanie would remain as Elliot's nanny and work alongside Rosa's presence rather than in opposition to it. It was, Gerald noted privately in the careful records he kept, the first decision Roman Hargrove had made in 14 months that did not have the particular quality of a man trying to solve his way out of grief. It was the first decision that looked, instead, like hope. 3 months later, Hargrove House was a different place. Not dramatically different. The iron gates were still there, the half-mile driveway, the portrait gallery with its serious ancestors. Roman still worked 16-hour days. Gerald still kept his precise records. The chandeliers still threw rainbows across the hallway floor on sunny mornings. But in the sage green nursery, things had changed in ways that were both small and immeasurable. Elliot had 14 words now, more than he'd had at any point since his development had stalled in grief. He had more, which he used constantly, with great enthusiasm, directing it at Rosa like a request and a command and a greeting all at once. He had bird, which was his word for the feather, and go, and no used with a firmness that made his speech therapist quietly overjoyed, and, most recently, most preciously, Ro, which was what he called Rosa, and which Rosa accepted with the satisfaction of someone who has been given exactly the right name. Rosa came every morning in her red coat. The toggle button had been replaced. Roman had noticed it missing and mentioned it to Gerald, and a small envelope containing 3 replacement buttons had appeared on Maria's desk the next day, with no note, and she came to the nursery, and she sat with Elliot, and she narrated her day, and made toys walk, and sometimes held the feather to his cheek until he giggled, and sometimes just sat with him in the good easy silence of children who have decided they are friends. She had also, over the weeks, made a decision about the nursery. The decision had been communicated to Roman not through any formal channel but directly. Rosa had found him in the hallway one morning and taken his hand and pulled him to the nursery doorway and pointed at the wall that had been repainted after Vivian's death, the wall where the fox mural had been. Animals, Rosa said, with the clarity of someone stating an obvious fact. Elliot wants animals. Roman had looked at the blank wall for a long moment. He can't see them, he said, and his voice was careful. He can feel them, Rosa said, with such complete certainty that Roman found he didn't have an answer. He had called the artist 3 days later. The mural went back on the wall. The foxes, the rabbits, textured this time, raised slightly from the surface, so small hands could trace them. Elliot had spent an entire morning with his fingers moving over the shapes while Rosa provided narration. That's a fox. That's a bunny. That one is running. That one is sleeping. Maria had watched from the doorway and thought about calling her mother, and then thought it might be better to just let it be a moment that existed exactly as it was. Roman stood beside her in the doorway. He stood there a long time, watching his son's face, watching Rosa's voice work its particular magic. She saved him, he said. Not to Maria specifically. Just out loud, into the quiet. Maria thought about that. I think maybe they saved each other, she said. Roman looked at her. He needed to laugh, she said.
But she paused.
She needed somewhere that let her be exactly what she is. A lot of people have told her she's too much. Too intense. Too emotional. goes toward things too fast. She glanced at the nursery. Here, that's the whole reason she matters. Roman was quiet for a long time. It should always have been that way, he said. For her. A pause. For a lot of people. Inside the nursery, Elliot laughed at something Rosa had said. Something about the sleeping rabbit, some 3-year-old observation that didn't need to make sense to be funny, and the sound came out into the hallway, and Roman Hargrove closed his eyes. Not in pain this time. The way people close their eyes when they are holding something they don't want to lose. The way you close your eyes when a song reaches the part you've been waiting for. The feather was on the windowsill, where Rosa had placed it carefully that morning, where the light caught it and made it glow like something that had been waiting in a parking lot for exactly the right child to find it. 2 children, 1 mansion, 1 feather, and a father who finally, after 14 months of silence, let himself stand in a doorway and listen to his son's laughter without looking away. Some things cannot be bought. Some things arrive in small red coats, with gap-toothed smiles and fearless hearts, and they walk toward the crying instead of away from it. And they change everything. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to remember that the smallest people carry the biggest light. And don't forget, drop your country in the comments. We're reading every single one. Before you go, I just want to say thank you for being part of this channel. If these stories bring you comfort, inspiration, or simply brighten your day, you can support the channel by clicking the thanks button below the video. Your support helps me continue creating more heartfelt stories for this wonderful community, and truly, every bit of support means the world to me. Thank you for watching, and thank you for being here.